In this video, we're going to try to find out whether or not you're painting in the wrong style. Over the last few years, I have found that I am watching a lot more painters on Twitch. I've actually started painting on Twitch myself back in mid-2020, so I've been doing it for a while. You should stop by if you get the chance. But I watch a lot of other painters paint on Twitch, and it's very interesting because not only are there so many different personalities and all that kind of stuff, and also different styles and things like that, but it's also very interesting to me how, at least it seems, I can learn a lot of different things from watching other people paint long term. I'm not talking about like a short little video like this long, but I can, over time, when I watch people, you'll catch these little bits where they teach you things where they don't even mean to be teaching you things. They're not saying, okay, now I'm going to teach you how to wet blend. They're just doing something and then you can see it. And sometimes, not always, generally, I learn more by having things explained to me with words. But every once in a while, I'll see something and it will go, I didn't even think to do it that way. Or, oh, that's really interesting. I didn't realize it took that long, or something like that. So there's a big benefit, I think, to watching other people paint. And there's something that I've learned just recently from doing this, which is, again, something I didn't know. I guess it makes sense, but probably one of the most difficult types of painting is the box art style painting. And that's something that I've been watching on Twitch over the last month or so, watching people who are painting to a box art standard. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as heavy metal. There's no H on the front of that because it's English. And that's kind of a GW-centric, very specific studio style. But when people are painting box art style, that means they're trying to make it look exactly like the front of the box that they would buy, or the pictures on the website and things like that. And generally the target in the situation is Games Workshop stuff, And it is an incredibly difficult style. It is top tier kind of Golden Demon sometimes stuff because everything has to be perfect. Box art style looks like it does because throughout the entire process there was never a bristle out of place on anyone's brush. Like everything was perfectly done. And it is an ideal, and it's something you kind of look towards is like someday I'll paint this way or whatever. But I've always been more interested in grunge, the way that these models, when they're perfect looking like that, they look like they're on the showroom floor. You know what I mean? Like they're being sold. Like, hey, this dreadnought, this gets 2 feet to the gallon or whatever the deal is, that kind of thing. And I don't like my models to look like that. It just seems weird to me to do it that way. It's personal preference, you do you. But the thing that I think a lot of beginner painters don't know, and maybe even some painters who've been doing it for a while, I guess I never really thought about it and realized it, painting box art is really, 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 really hard. And painting a little grungier, a little bit more war-torn, a little bit more naturalistic, I think in many situations is actually easier. So here are some quick tips for those of you who are thinking, I want to start painting or I want to make my painting look a little bit better or something like that. But I'm going to steer you away from that box art style, and I'm going to tell you there are easier ways to make your paint jobs look better by making them look worse. And by not the paint job itself, but the actual model, making it look lived in, making it look covered in mud because a mortar shell just went off near it, that kind of stuff. One of the natural things, of course, is wash. A lot of shade, wash, whatever you want to call it. It's a very, very, very thinned down paint, very transparent, and it has usually something in it, some sort of other compound that helps to break the surface tension. So when you slop it on and put it all over the model, or maybe put it in just certain areas of the model, as it starts to dry, in the flat areas, the surface tension will break quickly. So then, therefore, the fluid will all just kind of run down and go into the crevices and stuff and pop out that detail more. And it makes everything look darker. The idea behind it breaking away and popping off the flat areas is that it shouldn't darken the flat areas too much. You've painted this blue, now you put brown wash over it. Now it's kind of a browny blue. The idea is that as it dries, the flat areas should be relatively, unmessed around with, but you're still going to be darkening things a bit anyway. The thing about wash is that one of the biggest things is that obviously it brings out the detail, but the other big thing is it also can hide a lot of sins. I say this on Twitch all the time. Any spots where like your paint was supposed to come up against another paint along the edge of a shoulder pad or an arm thing, or where the skin meets the sleeve or whatever, sometimes the paint just doesn't get up perfect there. You slop some wash in there to kind of, darken everything up, grunge it up, make things look a little bit more naturalistic and lived in, and it will just basically cover those little spots a little bit, especially in the crevices where the paint didn't match up personally, and now you don't notice it. Wash is incredibly important. I've talked about it a bunch of times before. I talked about how it's one of the biggest recipes for a beginner painter, pachow. And so, yeah, definitely. I know there's a lot of folks out there in the fancy schmancy, paint world who are like, oh yeah, I don't use washes. Don't, just stay away from washes. And that's fine for what they want to do. But if you're trying to make a bunch of soldiers look like soldiers and not models who are dressed as soldiers, I'd throw a bunch of wash on them, frankly. Another big trick that I use on literally just about every model I ever paint is dry brushing. Sometimes I use it a little, sometimes I use it a lot. I have talked plenty of times in the past about dry brushing. Dry brushing kind of can be like edge highlighting. Edge highlighting is being very, very careful and taking a very small brush with just the right amount of paint in it and sliding it along the edges of a panel on the side of the tank. Don't push down too hard, don't let up too much, because otherwise the width will waver and all that kind of stuff. So you do this sort of outlining and you get it all over, and it can take you years, maybe, I suppose. I don't know. I don't generally do it too much, so I don't know exactly how long it takes, but I know it takes a long time. I know that dry brushing rarely takes that much time at all, and as long as you get a good amount of the paint off of your brush and you use a makeup brushes are key to dry brushing, pachow, then you can do a little bit of it and you didn't overdo it right away. So you do it and you go, okay, a little bit more, okay, a little bit more. It's always good to do 20 back and forth strokes with the dry brush than to do one and go, whoops, that was too much. So always make sure to get as much paint off your dry brush as possible. It's just a good idea to help lighten up and highlight edges to things. It also has a tendency to tie the model together or the terrain together. It also has a tendency to make everything kind of look like it's covered in ash and soot, which very frequently happens in war zones. There's also a lot of weathering that you can do very simply. There's different levels of weathering. You can just use a little piece of sponge that, like something, and you dab a little paint on it, you dab a bunch of it off onto a piece of paper towel, and then you just sort of stipple here and there and you get some rust on the edge of your tank or the edge of your killer robot or whatever, and use the right color and you just do a little bit of layering and it can look great. You can have some really great looking rust and things like that. Another thing you can do is to use that salt technique where you spray some hairspray onto the model and then you sprinkle salt on it, wait for it to dry, and then you kind of brush away a bunch of the salt and all that kind of stuff. You airbrush in between. Sam's got a video here on the channel about how to do it. Pachow. So take a look at that as well. I have a tendency generally to stick more with the foam because I don't have as many steps in between, but it doesn't look as random sometimes as the salt thing. But any kind of weathering works well. I also am a big fan of using just good old contrast paints from Citadel to do stippling. I just use kind of a tiny little brush that's kind of seen slightly better days, and I just do a lot of poking. I did a bunch of it on a bunch of Nurgle folks and on the big banner that the Nurgle guy was carrying for my Warcry group. Check that video out. Pachow. There's just a lot of things you can do with stippling to basically add real life into what your models look like. But the other thing is you can use it to also cover mistakes. That's the biggest deal. When you are painting to box art situations, there are no mistakes. When you get a mistake, it's almost impossible to cover. Sometimes you have to start over from people that I've talked to, so you have to be incredibly slow and perfect and not screw up. But when you're trying to get stuff onto the tabletop, you're not trying to make a display piece, you're trying to get toys to play with on the tabletop, covering everything in weather and rust and stuff like that can help get rid of any kind of mistakes that you may have made and also just make your models look more real. Box art is box art for a reason. Again, like I said, it is an ideal. It is something you look at and go, wow, that is the best this thing's ever going to look. That said, and this is not a conspiracy theory, but I've been talking to friends of mine who are painters over the last 5 to 6 years, and specifically with Games Workshop, because I'm not that good of a painter, but they have been thinking, has Games Workshop been sort of ratcheting down the quality of the box art? Not that the painters are getting worse or anything like that, but maybe they're just trying to lower the bar a little bit. So when you pick up that box and go, well, I can't ever do that, you're less likely to just put the box back on the shelf. Whereas you pick it up and go, I don't want to say it's imperceptible because people have been percepting it, but I've just been talking with friends lately who've been like, yeah, I remember. And again, it could be rose-colored glasses and things like that. But some really high-end painters that I know have been talking about it and going, I wonder if they're kind of sandbagging a little bit just to make it so that it's a little bit more approachable to the people who are going to potentially buy it, which I totally understand. What do you think about that? Let me know in the comments below. Again, like I said, I don't think it's a conspiracy theory. It's just something that people have been noticing. But the idea that box art is of a specific style, and it is, even if it's ratcheted down a bit, an ideal, that's something that you want to think about as a beginning painter, but also think it's not where I have to start for sure. Maybe someday I want to get there, but I don't have to start there. I can just paint stuff that looks like it's covered in mud.